Okay, we're all set.
All right, great. Thank you, John. All right, good evening. It's February 17th, and this is the fourth public meeting of the PRRC, the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. This is the result of an executive order issued by the governor this past summer. I'll note that the order doesn't prescribe a particular method to go about this approach. It leaves it to individuals, communities to craft that based on relevant factors in their communities. In Troy, we've had a number of efforts underway prior to the executive order. I felt it was important not to lose momentum on those matters. I felt it was important to get them completed or at least well along before embarking on this exercise. At the same time, I do not see that reinventing is an event as much as it is a process. So we are approaching this as not as an exercise that concludes once the report is submitted to the state. In some form or another, it will be ongoing, and it will be an organized dialogue among those in the criminal justice system, mental health, substance abuse communities, and the community at large. I think this is necessary if we're to build enduring trust and effective responsiveness to the needs of our community. So this PRRC is but one step in a process that started well before the summer and a process that will continue well after April 1st. As it happens, the chief and his leadership team have been engaged in a series of changes in the department since they assumed their respective roles. And a great deal of work was done this summer to advance those changes. I'll give you a few examples. We have reworked our use of force policies. They are now consistent with the 8 can't wait principles. I think actually before this summer, we were probably consistent with 7 of those, and we really only needed to make one change. We've reworked our discipline policies and continue to work on those so they link more seamlessly with the newly reconstituted Police Objective Review Board. We have completed the State of New York accreditation process, which only about 30% of police departments in New York State have accomplished. It is a recommendation of the governor. We have been accredited for 20 years, and we went through the reaccreditation process again this summer. We reinstituted the Emotionally Distressed Persons Response Training, EDPRT. This is a 40-hour training program. We are all mindful of a number of tragic incidents around the country this past year between police officers and individuals in emotional or mental distress. We want to make sure our officers have the right tools for those sorts of situations. We had a class in December. Roughly 50% of the department has now completed that training. And at this time, we have 2 more sessions planned for this year. We've rewritten policies and procedures for the Objective Review Board to ensure that it's a citizen-led initiative, and we've recruited new members for the board. We are on the cusp of deploying body-worn cameras. They have been acquired, they have arrived. We are doing training and setup as we speak. So we've already in many respects begun the work of reform and reinvention. So now we move on to building on that work. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Chief of Police, Brian Owens, to say a few words. Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Owens, and I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of this meeting tonight. Some of you may know me and Deputy Chief Dan DeWolf personally or professionally. We have worked closely with people throughout the neighborhoods of Troy for many years, and that has continued in our current roles. The Troy Police Department is a full-service, New York State accredited law enforcement agency. Some of you in this meeting have likely interacted with the men and women of our department, whether in the ordinary course of your life, as a result of a call for service, or during a serious incident. We are fortunate to have caring members who are willing and dedicated to serving others. We demonstrate this through our actions and attitudes every hour of every day during thousands of interactions each year. There are countless instances of our members offering life-changing and even life-saving assistance to people we encounter. We are grateful for the strong support of our community members and strive to not only keep people safe from crime, but also to help people in ways big and small. We're also fortunate to have our partners on the committee, and especially thankful for the people and resources that these organizations offer to the people of Troy and beyond. While this meeting and the others that will follow are in the context of New York State Executive Order 203, the Troy Police Department has had ongoing conversations and collaborated with our community, including the neighborhoods and organizations represented by the speakers and committee members for many years, in some cases decades. We have evolved over time to better serve the people of our city, and we welcome the ongoing dialogue to find ways to improve as a police department. We also look forward to continuing to listen to members of our community on ways to address crime, disorder, and injustice. Our goal is to make Troy a healthier, better, and safer city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. The purpose of these meetings is to receive input from the community, but it is not the only and maybe not even the best way to interact with the committee. We do strongly encourage written comments. They will be shared with all committee members. They will be posted on the website, and they will become part of the record of this committee's work. Tonight's meeting is open to the general public for comments. Members of the public have registered in advance. Please understand the committee is still in a listening mode. No conclusions have been drawn at this point, and none will be until we conclude the listening sessions. I'd like to offer a couple words about the committee. Members of the committee were chosen because they bring experience either in the criminal justice system or because of those of their work with those who frequently interact with the criminal justice system. They were asked to serve on this committee to help us imagine how ideas brought to us by the public might be actualized to create greater transparency and trust, leading to a more welcoming and safer community for all. I know that not every interest group in the community has a representative on the committee, but every interest group in the community has been invited to share their thoughts and ideas with the committee. The intention is to put those thoughts and ideas in front of a group of people who can help make them a reality. Finally, I'll remind you there are a number of ways to communicate with the committee. Public meetings are only one. We encourage written comments that they can be mailed or emailed to us. All of that material will be shared with the committee and become part of the record. So if public speaking isn't your thing, you can still share your thoughts and ideas with us. Again, I'd like to thank you all in advance for your participation and critical thinking. At this time, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for the evening, Tamara Gatchell. Tamara runs a company called Creative Cadence, and over the years, she has done a good deal of work with Fred Miller at Khalil Jamison, who many of you know. Tamara's been extremely helpful in helping us organize our thoughts on this and helping us to create a design that we think will be effective. So Tamara, at this time, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to be here with you all this evening. I'm going to touch on the agenda. We started with some opening comments from the mayor and from the chief. I'm going to cover some of the process guidelines for our meeting this evening, and then we will go into the public portion of the meeting. We have about 7 people who have signed up to speak, so we will have the public comments, and then the committee will then transition into some working time where we will start to reflect on what we learned this evening through the comments that we heard from the public, and then also to start to look at some of the themes that we're hearing from the affinity groups and the 2 public forums that we've had to date. So just to cover quickly a couple of process guidelines. Committee members, if you could please mute when you're not speaking, and *6 will mute and unmute. Those who have signed up to speak this evening will have 3 minutes to address the committee. I will give you about a 10-second notice when you're close to the end of your 3 minutes. There will be another public forum that will be held next Monday night. So if you have not had a chance to sign up yet and would like to address the committee, you can go to the website and you can sign up to speak. You have to sign up to come to the Zoom meeting and then also fill out a form to speak. And that will also be held next Monday night from 6:30 to 8. We also have another affinity group meeting that will be coming up next Wednesday. And we are going to be hearing from some youth groups that evening, and then also from Police Chief Owens. He's going to talk to us about kind of the current state of the department and share some information that's been requested by the committee. So I will now turn it over to John, and he's going to bring our first person that has signed up to speak.
Thanks, Tamara. Can everybody hear me? Great. So we have several folks have signed in. These you'll be speaking in order that you submitted your name. So that's the order in which you'll speak. The first person to speak will be Jerry Ford. Jerry, just give me 1 minute to unmute you, okay? Go ahead, Jerry.
Good evening, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay. My apologies. So first and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak. I know I did speak as part of the PRR, as part of the Troy Coalition of Black Leaders, but I just kind of wanted to just double back and just kind of speak from a different perspective as an individual, as a Black man, around the same age as George Floyd and Epson Thevenin, as a father with 2 Black sons around the ages of Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, with a daughter about the same age as the young girl who was just maced out in Rochester, and a wife who is about the same age as Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor. All of those names, except for Trayvon Martin, were killed at the hands of police, and Trayvon was killed by George Zimmerman, we know, who was an aspiring police officer. I said all that to say this. Chief Owens' comments in regards to systemic racism not existing in policy form could very well be accurate, but it's individuals within a system that are allowed to get away with things that corrupt the whole system. We've had those instances here in Troy where a few individuals have cost us taxpayers dollars from our pockets because we had to pay out for their misconduct. And while they did these deeds that they did, abusing people and doing other things of that nature, they hid behind their badge, they hid behind the system. So that makes the system guilty also. And so the reason why I'm bringing all this up, I said all that to say this, is that when we look at ways to fix the issue and to reimagine what policing is, I want to echo what DA Donnelly said on Monday, and we have to really dive deep into diversion. As you know, and those who may not know, I co-founded the Block Center, which is a positive youth development program in partnership with the Troy Boys and Girls Club. At our height, we would have some 30 to 40 youth in that crammed in the Troy Boys and Girls Club in those rooms downstairs, 30 to 40 youth off of the streets in Troy. That program went on, and I thank the mayor and Deputy Monica for acknowledging the fact that our program won second in the nation for leadership and character development. And there are other programs.
Jerry, we're about 10 seconds left.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. And there's other programs where we talk about diversion and getting youth off of the streets. And so there comes a time when we got to take a hard look at the budget and shave some of the militarization off of the police, reallocate some of those funds and put those back into community services where we're servicing our youth and keeping them out of the streets so they don't have these encounters with the police.
Thank you, Jerry.
You're welcome.
Next up is going to be Bob Blackman. Bob, just give me a second to unmute you. Go ahead, Bob. Bob, you're still muted on your computer. You're still muted, Bob.
How about now?
You're good.
Okay. Well, thanks, and good evening to you. I'm a founding member of the Justice Center of Rensselaer County and currently serving as a board member. I commend our city administration for putting this process in place, and the same for the 15 of you who are volunteering your time and energy to develop a set of findings that I assume will be helpful to the mayor as he plans for police reform. However, I continue to be shocked at some officials' reluctance to acknowledge that systemic racism exists in the Troy Police Department. We saw that in the virtual symposium, Time for Reckoning, last fall, and we heard it again Monday evening. Of course, racism exists in the Troy Police Department. There really is not a question about that. Ask the hundreds of Black men and women who over many years have been verbally and physically abused by our police officers. We could ask Archie Davis, James Foley, John Larkin. We heard Jessica Ashley say that she witnessed the Davis incident. We could ask her. We could also ask the family of Edson Thevenin. They have firsthand and sad knowledge of systemic racism. In my opinion, we will never be able to comply with the governor's order until our police chief acknowledges the presence of racism in the department. In my world, you can't fix a problem that you don't admit you have. I'd like to turn now to last week's presentation by the Black Leaders Coalition, to Jerry Ford's comments in particular. Among other topics, he raised the issue of the city budget and that a huge portion of the budget is for the police department, not surprisingly. That made me begin to think about how many police officers a city the size of Troy really needs. I went online and found a report on the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. That document stated that for a city of our size, there are an average of 2 police officers per 1,000 residents. Using that average, which is based on 433 cities, we would have 100 police officers. I think we currently have about 130. So consider this, as retirements and vacancies occur, perhaps the salary savings would fund some of those good social programs that were talked about on Monday night and that we remember fondly. In closing, let me say that police reform, in my opinion, is really not rocket science. All we're asking is that you alter the culture of the department to make it kinder and gentler, to make it a department that treats everyone fairly and non-violently, regardless of race, color, sexual orientation, or anything else, and to make it a department that's not dominated by the union. Is that too much to ask? I think surely not. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, next up is Rafael Varela. Hold on one second, Rafael, for me to move you over. All right, go ahead, Rafael.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. I listened carefully to the presentation of everybody through the different days. And I also find it really difficult to listen to the chief of police, Mr. Owen, stating he doesn't see systemic racism in the Troy Police Department because of the fact that nothing on his books is written to support racism. But at the same time, he had to listen and he has to know of all the cases. For example, we had a witness, Jessica Ashley, report that she was the witness to 10 police officers beating the shit out of a black teenager. And so when he hears that, how does he think that there is no racism? Is his wisdom that he thinks they would do the same to a white person and is therefore something that is okay, that nothing needs to change? This happened years ago. He was not the police chief, but he has to look at the broader history and context. And in this context, I think also the context is bigger, and the city of Troy, this administration needs to look at the history of prior administrations and setting the tone, because the police chief is not alone. And when he sees that this mayor and the city council go out of their way to cover up the murder of Thevenin, they are sending a message to this police chief clearly that they will cover up anything, that he doesn't really need to change anything. And then when we see that the mayor chooses this committee with 12 white people, the probation department, the district attorney's office, which are very involved in historically in overcharging with felonies and creating fake charges against minorities in order to force them to plead guilty, you are sending a message to all of us that we should continue to be afraid. So you are sending, the city needs to change the message. The leadership of this city needs to change the message in order for the police chief to even be able to change. So
Raphael, you have about 10 seconds.
please, let's work on that. And also, if you don't have the knowledge, please pay a consultant, pay black people to teach you about systemic racism. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Raphael.
Next up is Marquetta Edwards, and after that will be Nora McDowell. So Marquetta, just give me 1 second. All right, go ahead, Marquetta.
Hello, everybody. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. I live in the South Troy District 6. My name is Marquetta Edwards, and I am also the Executive Director of the Community Rising Project, a community organizer, a mother, and a grandmother of children directly impacted by our community. Troy definitely has seen a rise of crime and violence, but yet what are we doing about this? We aren't offering our children any options to heal or options to play. They don't have safe opportunities that are available to them. The parks are destroyed. The community centers don't exist. And our parents are left at devices that do not even allow us to be real parents. So I ask you all to take into account the fact that we need to offer options before we take into account that we need to hire additional police officers. Locking our children up is not the option. That is not the answer. Locking our children up is only harming them and creating more problems. Locking our citizens up is only creating more problems. It has been a well-known fact that jails do not heal people. So it is time that not only New York State, but Troy definitely get a hand on focusing on healing our communities instead of hurting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marquetta.
Thanks, Marquetta. I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Lastly is Nora McDowell. Two individuals who signed up do not appear to have logged into the call. So Nora McDowell will be our last speaker. Just give me 1 second. Go ahead, Nora.
Unmute. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, 3 minutes is hard. Let me tell you that. My name is Nora McDowell, and I live in this city with my husband, Ton, and our 2 teens in our family urban row home on Grand Street in Troy, New York. I came to Troy in 1986 when I moved to a Trip building, a 4-bedroom Section 8 rental subsidized apartment on Old 6th Avenue, Troy. As a teen with my strong mom and 5 children in one apartment. I'm now a working mom that leads from life experience that need more affordable family-sized housing, affordable day swimming pools in Troy, New York. I am a parent and board member of the Boys and Girls Club of the Capital Area. County, and one has now Troy City Schools. My personal contacts with Troy neighbor and both. I mourn the coronavirus health and the interruption of the youth programs and community time together. An increase in gun violence is the concurrent epidemic. I see the impact of designated city, state, and federal funding for regional teen programs having our poorest youth and adults in 3 highway connected capital areas of Troy, Albany, and Schenectady. A city gardener, and I know that we reap what we sow. Our teens are not weeds, they are seeds in danger of withering from lack of care and attention. The Troy, New York police reform process, there were affinity groups. I support their findings and I appreciate those people. I mourn the lack of time that the city has given to this. And if we can cheat Albany's homework, please do. We also need to talk about the privilege we enjoy in Troy. Troy has separate and unequal neighborhoods. Whiter neighborhoods and suburbs count on the police to keep crime from them. We will ignore a lot for that privilege. We don't realize that doesn't work anyway. Again, in 2021, we have an all-white Troy City Council, mayor, police, fire chiefs, and Rensselaer County executive, attorney, sheriff, clerk, and legislature now. That is both parties and all city and county public unions and voters backing the status quo for allocation of resources and political power. We don't have the community voice we need in the room when decisions are made. We don't have the discussions and solutions we need. We don't have the time for them. Still, I know it is so much harder to balance this budget. I am becoming quite bitter about suburbanites wanting free parking in a party city without paying any of the taxes for human and land infrastructure. Then we ask the police to crack down on crimes that often are rooted in poverty in our most overcrowded and under-resourced, overtaxed neighborhoods. In neighborhoods cracked apart by drug and trafficking around Colorado Bridge and Route 7 Iron Pipeline, and parking lots and off ramps in Troy, New York.
Nora, we have about
The
10
neighborhood
seconds left.
is so authorize the police. That's for my husband's time. There's no amount of military equipment that can solve these problems. Troy and Rensselaer County taxpayers. So we need to stop investing in riot and surplus tanks and social culture that heals and builds community relationships. We need to reunite the community.
Nora, you're coming in broken up.
Recognize community volunteers
Nora, you're coming in all broken up.
that step in to repair the pain. Okay.
Nora, could we,
I
as John
submitted
was saying,
in writing.
yeah, could we get your statement in writing? That would be super helpful if we could get it through the email.
She did. I just checked the inbox.
Okay.
She sent it a little bit before the meeting, so I will circulate it
great.
after.
Okay. Thank you, Nora.
Most importantly, my condolence, prayers, and hope for continued action in memory of the losses we've all handled. This urban grief needs attention and time.
Thank you to all of the speakers this evening. At this point, the portion of the public comment is over, and we're now going to move into the working time for the committee. Okay. So right before we opened up the meeting, we sent out a document that summarizes all of the comments that have been received to date. It's going to be a working document because, of course, we have not gone through all of the listening sessions. We're still in a listening mode, and it's just meant to be, here's what we've heard so far. So we know that it's something that we're going to continue to build on as we have another public forum next week, and then also another affinity group meeting. But what we'd like to do in the working time is if we could start first with just hearing some responses and some reflections on what we just heard from the public comments. And then we'll move into looking at what we have upcoming for the committee work. And then take a first pass at what are some of the themes that we're seeing. Again, we're not going into writing the report, but just to look at what's kind of, what are we hearing from a lot of the folks who are commenting, and start to pull up some themes. So why don't we go ahead and start just with some reflections on those that just came to the public portion.
Hi. Did everyone that spoke, did they all submit something in writing? Because Mr. Varela's presentation was breaking up also. So, I mean, he made some comments. He mentioned probation. So what he said about probation in the district attorney's office, I didn't hear. I don't know if anyone else did. But
Laura, I think that's a really good point. I think if the folks that came tonight to speak, if you're still on, if you could submit through writing, it's very helpful for us to also have it in that form. And it did seem like we were having some communication difficulties with a couple of the speakers.
Thank you. One of the things we've heard several times is about diversion programs. And I assume people are talking about diversion in the sense of before someone is charged with an offense. But I did want to just bring up that at probation, we have a whole unit dedicated to diverting youth from court. And Deputy Chief DeWolf mentioned raise the age, and that is part of it. When police give an appearance ticket for a youth, they come to probation, and we work to create a case plan. If there's any work that needs to be done with a youth, or if it's something simple, we may just close the case if we don't feel there's any intervention that has to be made. So I did want to, I don't know if everyone on the call now is aware that we do have diversion built into what probation does on a regular basis for youth. And, a lot of programming is involved with it, including referring out, but we have a program that we do within probation, interactive journaling and cognitive programming for behavior change. Another thing I wanted to mention is Judge Meyer is currently exploring a concept called the UCAN court. It's something that the city of Cohoes has, where a youth, not a youth, would have to be someone 18 to 24, but if they went through the Troy City Court, the judge would have them go to probation and connect them with a mentor. That would be part of it. And then at the end of it, they would not have a record. I think that would be part of the whole process. So moving people out of the system. But so I just wanted to make that point about diversion specifically, because diversion has been brought up, and I just didn't know if people were aware of that part of it. So that's all.
Thank you, Laura. Kevin?
Thank you, Laura. The diversion I heard today, I think, was both with Jerry and also, I believe, with Marquetta. talking about, non-offense diversion, activities for youth to engage folks, some alternatives to behaviors that are out there that get people in trouble. That's what I heard, both with Jerry and Marquetta, and I believe also some of the remarks with Nora that I could hear.
I was
Justin?
also going to say the same thing. I think what I was hearing was funding for programs for youth of Troy in general, before they even get into this, the system. I'm hearing that the issue with the youth is that there is very little programming for them to participate in. So how, funding for programs that would even, prevent them from having, these type of issues and getting into, the system. So that's what I was hearing as well, Kevin.
Thank you, Justin. Renee, are you ready? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard the same things that Justin and Kevin talked about, but I also heard a lot of mention about systemic racism, and this has been a discussion, I know, definitely on the last call, the last meeting, and it has come up in other meetings as well with the group, and the chief has explained what he meant by systemic racism, and what the participants here are explaining their interpretation or understanding of racism, or systemic racism. Will be more specific about that. And I'm just thinking that at some point there may be a need to have a third party to come in and take a look at policies to make sure that there are no unconscious types of biases that are within the policy that may contribute to that, and have that explained to the population what the policies really mean. That just seemed to be a common thread, and I understand what the chief was saying. When you build these things and you think you're taking it out, there may be something in there, but I think that may be something we need to take a look at as we continue on with developing this report.
Thank you, Renee.
And I would,
Other reflections? Yeah.
am I okay to talk?
Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I would add to that, I guess, that, it's been a pretty consistent theme ever since we started, that there's been a concern about systemic, structural, institutional, whatever you want to call it, racism, which I think I suggested the last time that we come up with a common definition, which several people said that is actually, there is a common definition that's pretty universally accepted. And it certainly involves, it doesn't have to involve anything intentional or explicit. It is simply policies or practices that lead to, regardless of whether they're, in fact, who has explicit policies discriminating against people of color? Very few people do. So it's really policies and practices that, not intentionally, but have developed over time, that end up causing individuals who work for the organization to have unequal opportunity or to be unequally treated. And the same is true of people who maybe receive services, or in this case are people who the police interact with in the community. So, if it's certainly not, it's rarely intentional. And when I said it exists everywhere, it really literally exists everywhere. Unity House, I really want to get that audit that they talked about, because it's so hard for us to see it. I know it exists, but I can't tell you yet. We're working on it, trying to understand which policies and practices, cause people to be unequally treated. I mean, I can come up with a few examples of possibilities, but it just seems to me that this is such a consistent theme. We really need to tackle it head on. And I think it would be important if we can come up with that definition, that it's not explicit, that perhaps, and this is not for me to say, but that we can all agree that it exists in the police department, in the probation department, in the district attorney's office, at Joseph's House, at Unity House, in the city of Troy, et cetera. And I think that might go a long way to break down a barrier. We're not fighting about that. We're talking about what do we do about it. So, I suppose I'm getting ahead of what we heard and getting to what we ought to do about it. But I just think it's so consistent. We need, it's time to, to tackle that.
Thank you, Chris. Just from a process perspective, if you can either raise your hand with the raise hand feature or just wave, either way works. So let's go over to Ken.
Thanks, Tamara. So I wanted to bring that. I think the Justice Center, one of their recommendations is the racial bias audit. And that's what Renee was talking about. That's what Chris was talking about. So, that'll definitely, I think that'll end up as one of our recommendations. I've never participated in such an audit. So I don't know what it entails, but it sounds like something that, I don't know if any of us here are qualified to do that. I think it would be a third party type audit with an organization that understands how to do that. But I definitely think that should end up being one of our recommendations. But I wanted to talk about, I think it was Nora McDowell brought up the composition of the various government bodies. She brought up the Troy City Council, the Rensselaer County Legislature, Troy City government, our administration, et cetera. It's actually a really interesting topic, and I have no answers to bring up right now on this. I just want to say, I remember when I joined the city council in 2007, and we had 9 members. All 9 members were white men, not a single woman on the council at that time. So that was problematic. I feel like we have made strides over the years. But part of this, I think, has to do with the districts in the city of Troy. This is a census year. We're going to get census data very soon. Once that census data is made available, there will be a redistricting process in the city, and I will strongly recommend. This is a personal recommendation. I guess I'm putting it forth to the committee that we have a majority minority district in the city of Troy. Many political jurisdictions have done that, and that will ensure adequate representation on a governing body like the city council. But anyway, tough issue. I've served with Black members, such as Anastasia. I did not serve with Deb Garrett, but it seems like having minority representation is an exception and not a rule. At least on the Troy City Council, and that's sad. And I don't know how to change that other than to encourage more people, more people of color to step up and run for office. I think we are seeing that more recently, considering current events. But that's what we need to encourage people to step up and put their names out there and run for political office. And part of that is all of us. It's our responsibility to evangelize when we're in our neighborhoods and we're at neighborhood meetings. I literally just got out of a Little Italy neighborhood meeting, and even in our neighborhood groups, we don't see a lot of people of color coming out to our meetings. And how do we solve that as well? I mean, that's probably the lowest level of representation you can have is within a neighborhood unit, and then you move out to city council districts, and then you move out to the full city. How do we get more people involved? It's a question I don't have answers to, but I'm putting it out there, and I agree with Nora that it has been a problem in the city of Troy for a while.
Thank you, Ken. Monica, I think you waved, and then we'll go over to Justin.
So everybody can hear me. These are new headphones for me. So the third party review, I'll send along that link that I found the other day because it has the RFP, it has the responses, it has the draft document as well too for the the review, the third party review. So I'll send that around just so people can get familiar with themselves with the document and what the work is, just as a educational piece. That was the one from Albany.
Thank you. Justin?
I was just gonna say, going off of, I think it was, yes, going off for Ken's point, and I actually should have said this maybe a few meetings back when we were talking about the number of minorities on the Troy Police Department. I think the question that Ken raised has to be a question that shows up, to the table. What processes are we taking? If we see this as an issue, what processes are we taking to reach out or to evangelize, to get minorities to apply, to positions such as the Troy Police Department? Is it just something that we're saying, well, minorities didn't apply or didn't take the test, and so, but what process do we have to solve this issue? When I was working for the organization that I worked for the Black and Latino Achievers Program for the Capital District YMCA. We served a large portion of minorities, Black and Brown students. And so there was a process that we had. We needed staff that looked like the students that we serve. And so we couldn't just say, well, no Black and Brown people applied. And so we had a process to go after to look and see who it is that we want to reach out to let them know that these opportunities are available. This specific group of people, this specific group of minority staff or adults that we want to come into our program. How do we, reach, what's the process for us to reach them and not just say, oh, well, nobody applied, so now we have to go with what we have. So I think that the question needs to come to the table and there needs to be some type of process on what do we do, to get the people that we're saying that we need into these positions.
Chief Owens, thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Justin. We were going to talk about this at the meeting on the 24th, but we'll talk about it a little bit now. You're absolutely right. And this kind of goes back to one of the other issues about communications and how well we are at sharing information. So the civil service test is offered generally every 4 years. And a few years ago, the test was coming up. And so we understood the importance of recruiting and not just what was typically done in the past. Maybe notices were at public offices of a civil service exam, or it might be on the city's website. But we did what you're suggesting. And so we partnered with the Troy African American Pastoral Alliance. So through clergy members, they're able to reach minority churches and members. We handed out actual cards giving information about not only the exam, where to find it, and also offered for anybody who was interested, kind of like a prep course, not a formal prep course as in like a formal education, but just some tips on how to take civil service tests. So we went around, we distributed those. Our members, as they were out on patrol, would hand them out to people in neighborhoods. We posted them in stores, steward shops, corner stores. And so we did try to get that message spread as wide as we could. And we also did social media, typical print media, obviously. We did radio, so like FM radio media. We did a video. So we tried to hit a wider range of communication methods to get that message out. But really, a lot of it, I think, was that direct interaction within the neighborhoods. I don't have the exact number. We'll look it up. We'll have it for next week. But I think it was around high 300s, if not 400 people took the test, which was higher than it had been in previous years. And so that gave us that wider pool of candidates that we have to draw from.
and hopefully that's more representative of the city's population. We did just hire 7 new members of the police department over the last week or so. We had 2 different groups that were sworn in, and it is representative. There's females represented who are typically underrepresented in law enforcement, and we had 2 people of color within that group. So to get to be a more reflective or more representative police department, we have to make sure we have a broader pool of candidates to pull from, which is exactly what you're talking about. And that's what we did for this last civil service exam. So I hope that's helpful and we could talk about it more.
Thank you, Chief. Renee?
I just wanted to add that, in addition to reaching out and getting more people of color to apply for these positions, we have to also look and make sure that we can retain those that we have already. And in doing that, we have to make sure that they are in an environment where they don't feel threatened. So now we're talking about not just a community interaction with systemic racism or fear or whatever, but also with having the officers feel safe within the ranks as well. So what we're doing here is not just for the community at large, but it's also for the law enforcement officers coming in as well, to make sure that we can retain good officers, those who are aware of the importance of being just and not discriminatory or practicing any sort of biases when they're doing their jobs.
Thank you, Renee. I'm just going to do a quick process check. We're at about 7:30 and we have about half an hour left. Does anyone have anything else that they want to reflect on with the public comment before we move into pulling out kind of some of the themes? And I know we've already started to touch on them, but to move, is there anybody else that has anything around the public portion? Okay. So again, we sent out a document that summarizes. It's basically what I would call just the facts. What it is it says, here's the comments that came in, either written comments or the recommendations that came from the affinity group presentations, and then also some comments that were made at the last public forum. And so what we've done is just taken them and just categorized them. If a like comment with a like comment, to put some order to it. And then also you can see where the source is, where the comment came from. And so what we wanted to do is just use the time that we have left to kind of pull out for our work tonight, just maybe 5 to 7, key things that feel like they're coming up, and we just were touching on some of them. And again, if we can just use the hand raise, either if you want to wave or just whoever would like to start. All right, Ken.
Tamara, I just have a question. This document, was this the document that was sent out like just as the meeting started?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Chris?
I think Monica had her hand up first. That's
okay, Monica. I'll let the two of you figure it out.
Okay. There's a lot of themes that come through, and obviously with Laura here, we hear the intervention, the diversion programs, the mental health. We hear all of those, but what I've been rolling around in my head and trying to come up with this, because there's a request for a document, right, that is out there about police reform, but there's our community who is talking to us and telling us that there are all these other things that are just as important that will help reduce interactions, that will lead to those interactions. So I think that we need to be conscious of that this could be a very unique document that is very Troy specific, and it should be Troy specific. It should not be Missouri or Chicago or LA, it's Troy. All of those other things influence us, but it's a Troy specific, and our community is telling us some very specific things, and they're talking about youth, and they're talking about communications, and they're talking about all of these others, intervention, the diversion, and those things. So there's a lot of energy around that. And I think that would be across the demographic as well too. We're only hearing from a fraction of the population. So when we write this, while it does say police reform, I think it's going to be that and much more, because I think we're going to have to build in some of these other pieces, especially specifically around youth and communications, and then the other social service aspects of the law enforcement side.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm glad Monica mentioned youth, because that's what I wanted to talk about. That I think it's been mentioned a lot, the lack of services, options, play opportunities, things to keep kids off the streets. It's been mentioned a number of times in a million different ways, and I think it really is important that we focus on what we do for youth, because prevention is so much more effective than trying to deal with things once it's gone to a point where criminal justice needs to intervene. And I'm very aware as a service provider in Troy, and I'm sure Kevin can back this up, that there is just a real dearth of services for youth in a million different ways. We are together on the Rensselaer County Continuum of Care, or the Homeless Services Collaborative, a couple different names for it. There are a number of different agencies that work together. We have a bunch of committees. We have a youth committee that we've gone a year and not been able to find a chair to serve as the chair of the youth committee, because there just aren't agencies that are actively involved enough in trying to serve this population. So I think it's important that we do have a focus section around youth, and which covers a lot of other territory as well. But that's all I wanted to say.
Kevin, thank you, Chris.
Thank you all. So yeah, certainly the themes of trust and transparency have come up repeatedly. We've mentioned before, but I want to highlight again, making the complaint process more accessible to folks. There are a lot of comments about oversight, objective review boards and their powers, and expanding their powers, and representation as well. The racial bias audit, I think, significant. And from what I know about the racial bias audit, it doesn't just look at policies, it looks at outcomes, and it looks at interface between officers and outcomes, and both in Albany and in Niskayuna, and I read a little of both of those. Those were the revealing parts of that, not just the policies. Diversion, certainly, and the mental health co-responding. I've been doing a little reading about co-respondence, looking at mental health practitioners who are skilled could divert some of the work from the police force that's unfortunately been handed to them because of the system's changed over the last 30 years. The mental health system has significantly changed, and unfortunately, in a default, public service has to take that on, and I don't think it's fair to them, and I think it's shortchanging folks who need that service. So I think it's a highlight for me as well that I've heard.
Thank you, Kevin. Council President.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. And the committee, I definitely think that we've heard quite a bit of passionate folks who really want to see more accessibility, transparency, accountability, inclusion. I guess process-wise, I was curious, after the report is drafted, do you envision, Mayor or Tamara, to put it back out for at least a public comment before it comes back to the council? I think that that would be a good idea. And I wasn't sure, I probably should have looked at our schedule, but I wasn't sure after the drafting of the document if it would go back out for public comment and then to the city council. Thank you.
Mayor, do you want to?
Yes, I don't have the timeline in front of me, so I can't give you specific dates, but it was always been the intention of the design of the program to put it out to the public, collect some comments, and address those in one fashion or another before it goes to the council.
Are there other themes?
Tamara?
Mm-hmm.
Quite a bit's been talked about the crisis intervention team, or, you know, whatever maybe that would be called. But I think that that's a major common theme that has arisen out of all of the meetings. And, you know, we've talked about trying to get our police department to focus more on crime prevention, violence, neighborhood violence, community policing. I see that as something we really have to, you know, move forward on, somehow address in the report somehow. And like we said, this is going to be a working document, but if we can, you know, free up our police officers on that, that would be a huge step forward, I think.
So I'm hearing a lot around trust and transparency and inclusion was kind of one thread. The other was around this crisis intervention, mental health. Kevin, did you have?
Yeah, and this was more earlier on. It was skill building, workforce skill building for police, the kind of training they get, including cultural competence training. De-escalation a couple times was mentioned by our affinity groups. Let me just say I've been really impressed with some of the work that some of these affinity groups have been doing. They've definitely dug deep and done some great research, and I'm glad they're sharing that information. Certainly with me, I'm learning a lot. But the de-escalation, I think, was also mentioned as a high recommendation. So looking at the forces training and ongoing training on a lot of issues that they recommended.
So I think I'll just read what I have so far, and then we'll see if we want to build on it. So I have the first one we kind of talked about was the reduce interactions, the diversion, the prevention. And then youth came as kind of the next thread that went with that. Trust, transparency, and inclusion, another thread. The idea around crisis intervention team, or that there's other, what was the language? Someone had really good, co-respondence was kind of the idea there. And then I heard skill building, training, ongoing. And again, we're not writing the report right now. We're just kind of looking at what are we, you know, what are some of those themes that are really kind of rising up as we. Monica.
So I've See, I'm making notes.
Making notes.
I'm making notes. I wish I had the board in the back so I could get my.
I know, we
Sharpies
need
out.
our whiteboard and our
I know.
sticky. Yeah.
So, as you guys are talking, I'm kind of putting like a high level word, right? And then trying to build stuff underneath it as you're talking. Like, so, kind of trying to frame out some executive words and then being able to put other words underneath them. So it's sort of just kind of, so then we can continue to add to them as we continue to hear more information. So I think, so some of the big things that I have right now are like prevention, right? So prevention, and that is intervention, diversion, youth programs, mental health, a lot of those things can fall within that realm. Oversight in general. So that's complaint process, that's systemic review, that's training. There's probably some other things around there. Policy, whether it's the review of policies, go back to the 8 can't wait policies, and a lot of those things that were already asked of those are that's the accreditation program. And then accessibility, taking the council president's word on that, that's the access to employment, that's the communications plan, that's the outreach, that's the marketing, that's all of those kinds of things. And then also going into those last few words that were just said, the trust, the transparency, and the inclusion, and making sure that those 3 overarching themes fall within each one of those areas, so using that as a guide as we continue to develop. So making sure that there's trust, transparency, inclusion involved of those buckets. So, I mean, it's a total working document, but just to kind of where my thought process is going, just to put it out there for other thinking and people to add to it or to dish it.
I think that's an interesting thought that, you could have those trust, transparency, and inclusion be more something that threads throughout all of the other kind of elements. So it's an interesting thought. Yeah. Kevin?
So the word that I don't hear in that sentence is fairness, and I'm assuming that would fall under trust. But I think fairness and equity is important theme through all of this.
And I'm not sure whether this would be included. I thought Monica did a really good job summarizing and putting things in the thematic buckets. Where would addressing systemic racism fit in there, Monica, or anybody else? Or is that a separate bucket unto itself?
It could actually go underneath all of them.
Yeah,
it really could. I mean, because if it's like trust, transparency, and inclusion, and if it's going to be thread throughout, it's got to be an overarching piece. But I think that's probably more like a policy, right? Like, because you're going to have review, either policy or oversight. If you take the typical model of changing mindsets, that's typically you have to get the executive level to buy into the program, but then you have to create your allies to be able to spread your message throughout the communities. So I think that should be held in the oversight area, so that it's a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up. Even though it's a bottom-up right now, it's a bottom-up voice at this moment in time. It needs to be led from the top down. That's my thought on that one.
Monica, where were you putting like skill building and continuous education? Was that in?
So I did training into oversight. So if you're talking about police training, you know what I mean? Like that's going to be an oversight. I think that's for me anyway. But and then the accessibility and skill building. I mean, if you take the social justice route of this, which is so intriguing to me at this moment, but if you take the social justice aspect of this, and with the civil service program that we operate under, because of we are government, right? So the civil service process is essentially designed to help make things equitable and make things accessible. But part of the challenges of that is the steps to get to that, right? So it's knowing about the tests that are coming up. It's making sure that people know what the tests are, what's involved in the testing process, and also making sure people have the education and skill sets from elementary school all the way up to get to that point. So, I think that that's also the accessibility pieces of that are, making sure that you have a pipeline, whether it's through education and job creation and skill building throughout the community as a whole.
Carmela.
Thank you. I was sitting here and I had a thought, and you may already do this, Dan and Chief, but when our new recruits get into the academy, is there any linkage of maybe walking? Like, I know they do the drive-alongs and things like that. Is there a linkage maybe with some of the neighborhood organizations to kind of walk the neighborhoods? Is that done now? I thought of it since we just had folks appointed, and maybe I wasn't sure, and that's probably part of your next week information, but I was just curious.
Within the academy itself, towards the end, before graduation, there's a little bit of supervised field training as part of the academy time, but certainly once the new officers graduate from the academy, they have approximately 8 weeks of field training. So they're with a senior police officer, and they obviously go on all the calls. And if there's that opportunity, yes, they should be stopping out in PWT and engaging with the neighborhood groups. If there's a scheduled meeting during that time, then they would attend with their FTO, because as much as we want that community police officer to attend the meetings, we also want the zone officers to attend the meetings, because that's just as important. Those are the ones that are going to respond to the calls, interact with the neighborhood more routinely than necessarily maybe the community police officer will.
Thanks, Chief.
You're welcome.
Monica.
I'm sorry. So there's this one thing that kind of still it's wiggling around in my head. So it's crime, right? So crime exists all across the city. So it's making sure, when we're talking about building trust, one of the biggest challenges, and Dan and Chief, please feel free to jump in. One of the biggest challenges we have to do is in solving those crimes or coming to bring justice to situations is to make sure that there's enough trust in the community to talk to us so that we can help bring everything back to justice. And I think that is something that the interactions are difficult, because I think there's not a lot of trust because of there's some other, in the legal system, there's been some changes, you know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of things that wrap around this that actually lead to a lot of distrust of the police officers due to other things outside of our realm as well too. So I think by and I'm really just kind of talking around it because it just popped into my head, because we still have to, even if we do all of these amazing things, you're still going to have crime, and there's still going to be an interaction amongst our community, some certain community members and the police department, and we're never going to be able to eradicate that. So making sure that the rest of the community members have enough belief and trust in our system and in our officers to be able to help, work around that and work that through with us. So that it's really raw and it's really rough, but I wanted to kind of make sure, because that no matter what, we're not going to get utopia here because we do all of these programs, because that element is still going to be there, and it's still going to drive bad interactions, because even through all the intervention programs and all the diversion programs and all the youth programs, we know that there's still bad characters in the communities, no matter color. So we're still going to have to deal with that and make sure that those interactions are better with our community to build the trust, so that hopefully we can solve those quicker.
Renee.
Yeah, and listening to Monica speak, and she is right, we will have crime, but I think the issue is the preconceived or the prejudgment of who's guilty and how things are processed. That's the issue. And so that boils down to going back and looking at the policies to make sure that we are dealing with, whether we know it or not, if it's there, systemic racism that may be built into the policies and we're not aware of that. So just having this discussion, I think that helps to kind of bring some of that to the forefront and kind of help piece this puzzle together. Because you're right, there is a trust issue. So we have to look at what is it that makes makes the community not want to trust the police officers. They're here to protect us. What's the issue? Why do they not want to trust? And we have to go back and look at the policies. How are they being implemented? Okay, we have policies. They do not have systemic racism built into it. Then we have to look at then how is it being executed? How are the officers interpreting it? How are they being, for lack of a better word for me at this moment, supervised or monitored in how they execute that policy, that job? As we're sitting here talking, that's what's coming to my mind about where we are with this report. Just answering why the community is not trusting, and I'll say the Black and Brown community is not trusting, and why is it perceived that the transparency is lacking? What is it that is being done that that the perception that there is no transparency?
Okay. Thank you, Renee. Chief DeWolf, or Deputy Chief.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about trust has actually increased a little bit. We've been able to solve a lot more of our crimes because the community has come forward more in the last 6 months than it was prior to that. So that's a good thing, obviously. And as far as like, there is no like preconceived, I'm going to go grab this person just because I want to grab them and arrest them. I mean, like most of our crimes, luckily, have evidence that support the arrest that you're making, whether it's the complainant or the victim who is IDing the person, or there's video of it, or there's cell phone records or so on. There's investigative, data that supports the arrest that you're making. So I'm just trying to educate a little bit so you don't think that there's just rogue people out there grabbing people off the street thinking that I don't like the way that person looks, so I'm going to arrest them, and like the old days and pin this on somebody. That kind of stuff, at least in Troy, doesn't happen. These arrests are supported, by documentation, by evidence. They have to go before, if they're a felony, they go before a grand jury. So it's I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Renee?
Yeah. So Chief, by you saying that, then that speaks to the part of communicating and educating, which I think is one of the items that was brought up in here. So we need to just do a better job at getting that information out to the community so that they see that that's part of that transparency.
You're absolutely right.
Trust. That helps.
You're 100% right. You're 100% right, Renee. We do not do a good enough job. And part of it is, I think that you just don't want to pat yourself on the back. But I mean, like, we do an enormous amount of training in all different facets of law enforcing, and they're not all going to the range. I mean, most of them have nothing to do with pulling your gun or trying to harm someone or anything like that. You know what I mean? We do de-escalation training. It's called reality-based training. You know what I mean? Where you're put into a room and you have to react. And you have to make decisions, quick decisions, and so on. And we do implicit bias training, procedural justice training. There's cultural diversity training within the academy. Over 1,000 hours at the academy before they even come out and see us. So there's, and I think Chief Owens is going to get into a lot of this next week. But yeah, we don't do a good enough job. You're right, and we're going to work on that so that the community knows that you have a very well-trained police force. You know, that it's not, we're not shooting from the hip here. And when we go on mental health calls, you're not just showing up, you know, some guy dealing with some poor person in crisis. They're trained, they know what to do. And many times, some of these EDPs are familiar with our officers and they trust our officers, and they willingly, you know, go to the hospital, and there's not a problem. We really don't have, I can hardly think of poor interactions with our people in crisis. Very, very few. I can't even think of any offhand. I'd have to go look, especially for the large number of calls that we handle. And on that one, I will pat us on the back. We do a very good job dealing with people in crisis. And I think that you would back me up on that, Kev, because, you know, some of those people are people that are at Joseph's house and so on. And I think our officers do a very good job. And it's I mean, you can see it in the reports. I mean, it's just, there isn't any real problems going on with us dealing with people that are in crisis.
So why don't we go, Kevin, do you want to respond to that? And then Renee, and then I'm just looking at the time, and maybe we could
Okay,
wrap
I'll
up
do
for
that
this evening. I think we've had
So-
some good conversation.
So yeah, I agree, Dan, that certainly generally it has been very positive and been very helpful. I mean, the system itself is frustrating. Some of that frustration boils over. And we're in the practice of writing letters of commendation every time we've had good officer engagement. And I think I've written about 6 or 7 of them over the past couple of years. So that's been really good. I think one of the things that it's a little bit different we haven't spoken about is all of this opioid. I think that, you know, officers are more frustrated when they're part of the response with folks that are overdosing and going with Narcan, and in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that has been, so it's been a little uneven with that. And I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that yet, Dan, but I apologize about that. But there's some unevenness depending on what the issue is.
I have a question for Chief Owens or Deputy Chief DeWolf. I believe it's Schenectady, they're doing that virtual training. Is that, what is your opinion on that virtual training, and is that going to come to Troy?
Renee, I'm not particularly familiar with exactly what that virtual training is. I know the concept. And so one of the things that with our new body-worn camera program that we're instituting, part of that includes some virtual reality training, if that's similar to what you're talking about in Schenectady. Mm-hmm. So we currently do an in-person, live, active role-playing, reality-based training. We'll now have the additional benefit of having this virtual training, so we can run more scenarios because we don't have to recreate the room, you know what I mean? Whether it's set up like an apartment or set up as whatever. So that is something we had not started yet, but part of the body-worn camera program package includes that. So that is something going forward we'll roll out. And again, as Deputy Chief DeWolf mentioned, we do have to get better at explaining what we do and educating people. And I take a lot of that responsibility, because for me, I don't like being the face of the police department, but that's the role I'm in. And I just like to get the job done and move forward and do good things and help people. And so we do that consistently every day. And we have to get better at explaining that and letting people see. So the transparency part is to see, like, not that we're hiding something, but to see and us to, I guess, transmit. So to share that. And that's something we're actively working on, and we will get better at. I can guarantee that.
Okay, so I'm cognizant of the time. We're at 8 o'clock, and I think we've had some very good discussion around the themes. What I think we'd like to do is just wrap up with just what's coming up next for the committee. If you all could just take some time to look through that document so you can see all of the comments that have come in, and we will look at that again on Monday night. So Monday night, we have another public forum coming up. And then on Wednesday evening, Chief Owens will be sharing some information, as you touched on this evening, some of the current states and things that are going on right now in the police department. And then we will have another committee meeting coming up on March 1st. And then in the early March, we'll start to do some writing of the plan. And then in mid-March, there will be a public comment period. So those are kind of the upcoming pieces. Kevin?
So yeah, I'm just looking at the original. So in the original schedule, it said PBA presentation. Is that an affinity group that's gonna happen, or on the 24th? I know that Chief Owen will present, but is a PBA an affinity group that's going to present or not?
Kevin, they haven't committed yet. They may submit in writing. I haven't got final word on that yet, but an invitation has been extended.
And there definitely is a session on March 1st. I don't have it on my calendar, so I don't know how I missed it. Is there a Zoom invitation sent out, or there will be?
There will be.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Somehow I didn't get that on my calendar.
And that will be a working session for the committee. Okay. So does anyone have any other questions about the schedule before we wrap up this evening? All right, thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to you. I think we had some very good discussion. Thank you for all your time this evening.
Thank you, Tamara. And again, thank you, everyone. I think there was good discussion tonight. I've been thinking about the report and how it might lay out, and it feels like trying to organize a bowl of spaghetti. But through discussions as we had tonight, it's starting to take a little bit of shape, and with subsequent discussions, I am confident that we can organize it in a coherent fashion. So we will have more of this, and at times it might have felt a little frustrating. It might feel a little disjointed, but through this kind of conversation, that's how we create some structure to it. So I know we're up to the task. And again, thank you for your time tonight, your time to come. We'll get this done. Oh, and thank you to the commenters as well. I think it adds. We've heard a couple of things a couple of times now, but it's important because it indicates the level of passion in the community around a particular issue. So if there are those who are listening who have not offered either written or oral statements to the committee, don't think that just because what you wanted to say has already been said, that you don't need to say it. It's still important for us to hear it. Helps us understand the relative weight of that particular matter. So again, I continue to encourage people to put forth their comments.
Mayor, if I could just chime in very quickly for those who are watching or maybe listening on YouTube or Zoom, in order to submit a public comment, you can go to the city website. It's www.troyny.gov/police-RRC. And there are links there and information to submit a public comment, to sign up for one of the upcoming public forums.
So I think that will be a wrap for this evening. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll see you on Monday.
Good
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.